let me see one thing here. Can you see the screen all right? Okay, good, thanks. I was supposed to give this presentation in April, as you probably, some of you probably remember. Walt Leginsky took my course. I taught at Ali last year in fall, and he came over to me and he thought that I would, if I would be willing to give a presentation to actual men's garden club, that would be nice. And we agreed for April. And as you all know, by April, we had a pandemic going all over. So it was decided to postpone the presentation. And so it would have been nice to meet with all of you face to face and do it. It's a lot more fun for everybody, speaker as well as audience, to get to interact personally, but we couldn't do that. So that's the best we can do right now. And I'm happy that Warren asked me to talk to you guys today. So we'll go there. The way I will do it today is that I have about less than 50 slides, and we will go through about 22, 23 of them, and we'll stop for a few minutes for question and answers. And then after that, I'll start again. And then when we end, then we can have more questions and answers. And that way it works pretty well on Zoom. I took a course in summer on Zoom, Ali course, and it worked pretty well. So hopefully it'll be okay this way too. I hope that suits you guys. Most people I've realized who are not soil microbiologists, or especially don't have background in agriculture, they tend to use soil and dirt interchangeably. Well, they're not the same. Let's look at soil, for example. Soil is alive. It has live microorganisms. It has nutrients, minor and micronutrients. It supports life with its naturally occurring nutrients and minerals. It's complete and self-sustaining ecosystem. And therefore it's a perfect planting medium, perfect medium for growing garden or row crops or whatever one wants to grow there. And you might, this right lower hand side picture you see, in case you don't recognize, is a mound of compost, and this stuff coming out of it, that steam, you may know that the reason why the steam is coming out of it is because it has live microorganisms inside. They're growing, they're metabolizing, and the heat is coming from the microbial activity. So if you had dead, they had no organic matter, there were no live microorganisms, you would not have that happening. And then on the other hand, dirt does not have essential minerals and nutrients in it. It has no humus, which is what makes the soil dark, good soil dark colored, and that's what you want in your garden. It has very few, if any, microorganisms in it. It does not support plant life. You cannot grow a productive garden in the dirt. Okay. And dirt is what you get on your collar, shirt collar, after wearing it all day, especially in the summertime when it's hot and humid. It's also on the road, and it's on the floor and the furniture if it hasn't been dusted for a while. So now you know that soil and dirt are not the same. Next time somebody calls your garden, you know, get some dirt for my garden, you say, I don't want that, I want soil. So, okay, I wonder why it's not moving. I have to do something else here to get back, get rid of this pointer. Okay, we'll be talking about rhizosphere a little bit. I won't dwell on it too much. Rhizosphere is the area of soil around plant roots. It is inhabited by a unique population of microorganisms, and those microorganisms are influenced by the chemicals released from plant roots. Plant roots produce all kinds of chemicals into the soil, and some of them sometimes can also inhibit other plants, and that's called allelopathy. We're not going to talk about that today, but there are chemicals that are released in the soil that attract microorganisms to it. Why? Because a lot of the chemicals serve as food for the microorganisms also. So that's rhizosphere. And rhizosphere has a greater number of microorganisms than the soil away from the rhizosphere. Why? Because it's very rich in all kinds of nutrients. And there are organisms in rhizosphere that are beneficial to the plant, and there are some that are harmful to the plant. And then there are in between, some that can be either harmful or beneficial, but most of them don't hurt or help the plant directly, but indirectly they might by influencing the other microorganisms in the soil. Now, first we're going to talk about beneficial soil microorganisms. And first of all, bacteria. Because they're abundant in soil. About 1 teaspoonful of soil contains about 100 million to 1 billion bacteria. And there's quite a few bacteria because each bacterium, the size of each bacterium is anywhere from 0.2 to 2 micrometers or micron. 1 micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter, and there are about 25 millimeters in 1 inch. So you can imagine how small these organisms are. And also 1 ton of microscopic bacteria may be active in each acre of soils. So as small as they are, there's about a ton of them in 1 acre of soil. They do all kinds of things. They decompose dead plant material and waste from other organisms and release nutrients. There's examples of some bacteria down below. Now, there are some bacteria that live in the roots of plants. You see the lower left-hand side. This is a clover or vetch plant root, and you have these nodules. They look kind of pinkish in color, which means they're good nodules. It means it has bacteria in it, and these bacteria are active. One of these bacteria is known as rhizobium. In case of soybeans, Rhizobium japonicum. They live in the inside of these nodules. They convert nitrogen from the air into the form of nitrogen that can be utilized by plants, because air has nitrogen gas that plant cannot use as such. It has to be converted into the form that the plants can use. And then when the plant dies, the nitrogen from these nodules is released into the soil, and then other plants can utilize it. Now, for those of you who come from Midwest, particularly from Iowa or Illinois, they grow a lot of corn and soybean there, and good farmers will rotate corn with soybean. Why? Because soybeans, they make their own nitrogen by nitrogen fixing, because of nitrogen fixing bacteria in their roots. So they do not need nitrogen fertilizer, which, farmer has to spend money to buy. And then corn requires a lot of nitrogen. So if you rotate corn with soybean, you don't have to put quite as much nitrogen in the soil to grow corn, So it's good way to grow both corn and soybeans. Of course, a lot depends on, farmers are good business people also. If they see that the price of soybean is really good, they grow a lot of soybean after soybean. If the corn prices go up, they grow corn after corn. But good farmers don't do that. They will rotate one with the other. And then what happens, these nitrogen-fixing bacteria, this happens to be a bean plant, living the roots of bean plant. They are fixing nitrogen. That's what it's called, nitrogen fixation. They take the atmospheric nitrogen from the air and convert it into the form of nitrogen, first ammonium form, and then certain other bacteria helped out and they make it nitrate, like ammonium nitrate is one of the fertilizers, a nitrate form that plants use. And so plants are getting nitrogen from the activity of bacteria, and in return, bacteria are getting sugars from the plant, which they need. Bacteria can't make their own sugar, these bacteria, at least nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So it's a beneficial arrangement for both sides. That's why they call that symbiotic nitrogen fixation. In addition to those bacteria that live in the roots of plants and the root nodules of the plants, there are also some bacteria that live freely in the soil. They are known as free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And there are two on the left, the bottom left, Azospirillum and Azotobacter. And then the third one is a blue-green alga. This a beautiful necklace type of thing. It's a chain of cells of anabina, which is a blue-green alga. That also fixes nitrogen in the soil. And I forgot to tell you that these nitrogen-fixing bacteria, symbiotic nitrogen-fixing bacteria, legume inoculants you can buy commercially to put in your soil in case your soil doesn't contain enough of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Warren was telling you that I worked for Kalo Laboratories for 5 years, and that was our main business, to make legume inoculants, which contain these rhizobium species. And then the Azotobacter fertilizers, which are free-living bacteria, they are available in the market. You can buy them also. So that's that. And then next group of organisms are fungi. Fungi are multicellular organisms as opposed to bacteria. And then they make thread-like structures. And what they do, they're really important in nutrient recycling. They bind soil particles together to increase soil water holding capacity. They also convert organic matter into the form that other organisms, such as bacteria and other things, and including plants, can utilize that. So fungi are really, really important. And some fungi, they are saprophytic, means they do not require live plant or animal or human being to grow. They just live in soil, there without bothering anybody. They convert dead organic matter into fungal biomass, means it helps their growth, and carbon dioxide and smaller molecules. So they degrade complex molecules, including some pollutants. So they're important. And also if you see a dead, dying or dead tree in the woods, you often see the mushroom growing there. Mushrooms essentially are the fruiting body of fungus. You only see one mushroom growing there. Underneath this, in the soil, there's a lot of fungal mycelium there. You don't see it. You just see the, as they say, tip of the iceberg, basically. So these fungi, they're growing inside this dead or dying tree stem, and then their fruiting body are growing on top, and same this one here in soil. And fungi, as I was saying, they are decomposers. Every fall, when all the leaves fall in the woods, or if we have a house that's surrounded by a lot of trees, if you leave those leaves there, by next spring, most of them are gone. Well, just imagine what would happen if we did not have fungi, bacteria, these things decomposing these dead leaves there. When they decompose dead leaves, They make humus, which is what is the good stuff that makes soil good soil, you know. So if you might have noticed if you have ever gone on a hike in the woods, that if you remove the top leaves, underneath it's really rich black soil. It's been created by these dead and dying leaves in the form of humus. It's there, you know. So, and then some fungi make association with plant roots. They are known as mutualists. Actually, they're another name for symbiosis, where both partners benefit from this association. There are two types of these fungi. These fungi, by the way, are known as Mycorrhizae. It's a Greek, both coming from Greek word myco and rhizae, means essentially fungal roots. That's what it means. And some, especially those around trees, they grow on the outside of the root. And then there are others that get inside the root in between the cells, but they make their fruiting bodies or spores outside. And these mycorrhizal fungi get their sugars from the plant, and in exchange they bring phosphorus, nitrogen, micronutrients, and water to the plants. And I had a really wonderful video that was about 16 minutes long. It was a little too long to show in this meeting here, but wish we had time to do it. It explains what happens. There's a scientist in Canada, in Alberta, I think, who's done a lot of research there. Mycorrhizae, the mycorrhizal fungi, they're connecting trees with other trees. And then they essentially is the communication system between trees. Not only they exchange nutrients, sometimes these tree roots, they cannot grow out real far, but these fungi connect roots of these trees with one another. And bigger, healthier trees sometimes will provide nutrients to the weaker or younger, smaller trees. They help each other. And also, they signals, it's just like the human brain. We have neurons that send the information between cells. Similarly, these mycorrhizal fungi, they transmit information from one tree's roots to the other tree's roots, you know. So they talk to each other that way. Really interesting. Then the other single-celled organism, in addition to bacteria, are known as protozoa. Protozoa feed on bacteria, and they release excess nitrogen by feeding on bacteria that could be used by plants and other bacteria. They are important food source for nematodes. I'll be talking about nematodes a little later. And some protozoa also cause human diseases, for example, malaria and dysentery, toxoplasmosis, and African sleeping sickness. These are the protozoa. When sometimes you eat something that's contaminated by soil, for example, if you go and to a peanut field, but people who are from this area where peanuts are grown, and if you dig up some peanuts and try to eat them without washing the thing and raw peanuts there, you know, sometimes you get dysentery because there might be protozoa on the root, on the soil, you know, that's sticking around the peanut hull. Then nematodes, they are tiny worms that feed on plant roots. Some also feed on algae, bacteria, fungi, and protozoa. And in the other side of this equation is that there are also some fungi and bacteria that feed on nematodes. And there are some bigger nematodes that feed on smaller nematodes. So it's really a food chain in the soil. You know, it's littler things are being fed by bigger things, and then those bigger things are being fed by things that are bigger than them, and in the end, some even the biggest things like that comes to animals, you know, basically. And then we humans, we go hunting and we feed on animals. So it's a food chain in the soil, underground food chain, basically. The nematodes are important because they disperse bacteria and fungi in soil because those things get stuck to nematode body and they get carried around. And some nematodes are feeding on fungi, others are feeding on bacteria, and some on the roots of plants. So these are known as plant parasitic nematodes. We'll be talking about them later. And then there are some insects known as arthropods. And among arthropods, some are predators, such as centipedes, spiders, beetles, scorpions, ants, and mites. And they live in soil. And some of them feed on plants, but others are also feeding on other insects. And some of them are used as for biological control. For example, lady beetle, right? And parasitic wasps. Then the other kind of arthropods are known as shredders, because what are they doing? They are breaking up complex structures such as wood and things like that by chewing them up. And they eat bacteria and fungi, and they stimulate microbial activity by feeding on bacteria and fungi, and they mineralize plant nutrients by excreting plant available forms. So there are some examples of them down here. One of the ones, this one that got a little horn at tip is the dung beetle. You might have seen in the newspaper 3 or 4 days ago, there was an article about this young lady getting her PhD at University of Tennessee in Knoxville, who is doing research on dung beetles in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. There are several dozen different species of dung beetles there. You may have noticed sometime, and the dung beetles, they feed on dung, feces of other animals and things, and they make a round ball and they roll it down and take it to their nest to feed their young ones. So in that process, they are basically serving as janitors of the forest. You know, just imagine if they didn't do that, if they didn't degrade it, there'd be a lot of animal poop all over the forest, you know, there, which is not too good for animals and maybe even for people who are hiking there. Then everybody knows about earthworms. They feed on dead organic matter, bacteria and fungi. They enhance the porosity of the soil, and they improve water holding capacity because they're going up and down all the time in the soil. They're turning the soil, bringing the soil from the bottom strata to the top and taking the top down, you know. So they're doing a good job. That it's almost like micro level planting, you know, that's going on. And so they also enhance penetration of roots deep into the soil because they're making these tiny holes, and young seedlings, they find it a lot easier to send their roots through these tiny holes into the soil, and then in the process of growing and getting bigger. These are the pupae of some earthworms on the side here. And you may or may not know that soil is also a rich source of antibiotics. Lots of antibiotics have come from soil. And the first antibiotic to be discovered by Alexander Fleming, Scottish researcher and medical scientist named Alexander Fleming, he discovered penicillin. That's an interesting story. I didn't have time to talk about it in great detail, but he got the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology along with 2 other people. Fleming discovered that Penicillium chrysogenum is a fungus, and that was killing certain bacteria. He was growing bacteria in a petri plate, and then he went away on vacation. He kind of not very good housekeeper, went away for a month, and he had put some plates by the window of his lab. When he came back, he noticed that there's some fungus was growing, and wherever the fungus was growing, there was a dead zone of bacteria, a clear zone. No bacteria were growing around there. He said, oh, this fungus is producing something that's inhibiting or killing these bacteria. He did that work, and two other people, one other figured out what is it that's causing these bacteria to die, and the third one found out how to commercially grow it. And so they all got Nobel Prize in the, I think, late 30s. And then the other one is streptomycin. Streptomycin was discovered by a Ukrainian immigrant, Salman Waxman, who was working at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He was a soil microbiologist also, had background in agriculture and worked in College of Agriculture. And he had a PhD student, Albert Schatz. Schatz isolated Streptomyces griseus, which is a bacterium that grows in chains. These bacteria are known as streptomyces, streptomycetes. So the Streptomyces griseus is one of them. So Waxman got a Nobel Prize for that work, but he conveniently forgot to include Albert Schatz when he submitted these papers. So Schatz did not get anything. So later on, he sued his former professor and got some money out of him, but his name doesn't show up in the Nobel Prize. And that was not a good thing that Waxman did, but he was a brilliant guy, and he and his lab discovered many, many different antibiotics later on. And that lab is still there at Rutgers, and some good scientists have come out of there. And then, of course, tetracycline, vancomycin, cephalosporin, and erythromycin. They are just a few of many, many antibiotics that were discovered or isolated from soil. So now I'm going to stop screen sharing for a few minutes, and let's see if you have any questions.
Yeah, there are some questions, and the first one was by Randy Harder, in which he asked, if I can bring him up here, is dirt a component of soil?
Is what the component of soil? I'm sorry?
Is dirt a component of soil?
Well, dirt will be, I say, if you take, what is
D-I-R-T.
Yeah, I got you. Thank you. Soil is made up of clay, sand, and basically those two things, sand, silt, and clay, three things. Okay. Add to that some organic matter and microorganisms. So dirt is a component of soil. Soil without any microorganisms in it is dirt.
Okay, good. Thank you. Another question from Claude. Are there soil amendments that increase the number of free-living nitrogen bacteria in soil?
Yes, there are some soil amendments. If it's a rich soil, you have some free-living organisms there. If you really wanted to increase it, you can buy Azotobacter inoculum. It's commercially available, and add to the soil. And if you want to grow some beans and peas and things like that in a soil where these things have been grown earlier, you may not need legume inoculants, but if you pull up the plant, leguminous plant, and it doesn't have enough nodules on it, and if the nodules are not, when you slice a nodule, if it doesn't look pink in color, it means it doesn't have good bacteria, then you can buy legume inoculant. Farm stores will have those things. They make legume inoculant for different kinds of legumes. They're kind of specific. For example, Rhizobium japonicum, which associates itself with the soybean plant. that will not be good enough for your pea or beans. You got to get another kind of rhizobium species to go with beans or with peas, you know. So that's how, so to answer is that, yes, these things are commercially available in farm stores and you can buy them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, added to that is a question from Lewis Lieb. If you grow soybeans and then harvest the plant, how much nitrogen is added to the soil?
Well, I don't have that that number in my head in terms of per acre. I can look up and give you the answer. But enough to.
Could I just clarify that? So if you're taking nitrogen from the air and you're putting it into the plant, and then you take the plant away, it seems like there wouldn't be, as opposed to plowing it under, seems like you would be removing all that nitrogen that you took from the air.
Well, the nitrogen is, you know, I didn't want to get into too much chemistry here because I guess it's a little too complicated and all of you guys will either be taking a nap or leave and I'll be talking to myself. So for that reason, I didn't add that. In a simple way to explain it is that air has different kind of gases in it, nitrogen being one of them, okay? Hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, oxygen, those kinds of things. And so the air, what these bacteria do, they take the nitrogen gas, they change it into ammonium form or ammonia form. Even that is not readily available to the plant. So another bacterium called Nitrosomonas comes in that converts that ammonium form into nitrate. And that nitrate is what the plant utilizes. And the other bacterium then comes that breaks the nitrate into nitrites. And these nitrites eventually go back, they break down and produces two things, elemental nitrogen or nitrous oxide that's released into this air again. So it's basically it's a cycle there. And
how does the nitrogen get into the soil to fertilize the soil?
Well, when the plant dies, which a plant that is making nitrogen, let me say it again in a different way. When this nitrate form of nitrogen is in the plant, you harvest the plant and all the roots and things are still in the soil. So the nitrogen is bound to that, and when the roots and things decay, that nitrogen is released in the soil. And so the next crop comes along, like after soybean, you get corn planted there, and that's available to corn. That's how it works.
There's another question regarding tree fungus axis. So we'll save that to the end. So maybe you can provide us a link to that. I have a question from Phil Barnett. Nitrogen fertilizer equivalent can be as high as 100 pounds per acre from a reasonable stand of alfalfa and vetch. That's not a question, it's sort of a statement. And here is a question, what is a way to reduce plant parasitic nematodes?
Well, there are different ways of doing it. You can, around Asheville, people, and I'm not being critical, I'm just stating the fact, majority of people are afraid of chemicals. And one should be to an extent, but it's like anything else, one can take anything a little too far too, you know. And so one way to eliminate nematodes is to use nematicides, which are chemicals. Okay. And the other way is for gardeners and a small gardener or something, you can buy certain, there's a fungus that grows inside of, I had a nice video of that too. and then known as catenaria. And if you can put that in the soil, they basically would infect the nematode and grow inside and essentially take over the nematode body. And you can see it growing outside of a nematode and producing more fungi. So that's another way to do it. The other thing is certain soil amendments. For example, when I was still in India working right after getting my first master's degree, which was in plant pathology, we were working on control of root knot nematode. And the professor with whom I was working, because I was a young guy, only 19 years old at that time. He had this project where they used sawdust. Sawdust you add to the soil, and it decomposes and produces certain organic acids like butyric acid. And that controls a lot of nematodes. You can see really good control of that. So you're putting sawdust in the soil and certain other organic amendments, sometimes that helps control nematodes too.
Well, I have a question that there are some beneficial nematodes, and
right.
can you announce they infest bugs, and that's how we control some of our moles. By getting rid of the slugs and the Japanese beetles, we can rid our lawns of moles, moles and moles primarily.
Yeah, I have done nothing about, I do not know much about them. I know, like you mentioned, that there are some of them there, but unfortunately, I don't know enough about them to talk about them. I can look up and tell you which ones they are. I'm not a trained entomologist. It's a good question for an entomologist, but it'd be something that I can look up, and then that way at least I'll know something about them. The best.
Okay, so
somebody said, go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, I'm done.
Okay. I was going to say that, as somebody said, the best way to learn something is to teach. That's part of the reason why I like to teach, because a lot of what I'm teaching these days, I learned back in between 1962 and 64. When I was a master's student in plant pathology. So you can imagine how many years that is now. And then later on in my career, I've done different things, but I did not stay with the same thing for decades and decades. I did, at one time in my DuPont career, I worked with fungicides, and both as a researcher and as a business guy. So I knew that, but even that, and I retired in 2007. So it's slipping away from me. And gradually it's getting harder and harder to recall stuff, it happens. So I'll go on to the second half so that we don't run out of time.
Okay.
And by the way, I realized I have another audio, another Zoom thing at 2 o'clock, so I better get going. Can you see the slide now? Okay. So we'll talk about harmful microorganisms, and we'll start with fungi. And one thing that will be in common among these fungi is that they all cause the diseases of lower stem and roots. And this is known as fusarium fungus. It causes yellowing of and death of plant on one seed, stunting of growth, and then usually leaves these dark brown color inside. So what these fungi do, this one and the next 4 or 5, they basically choke the plant by inhibiting the transport of water and nutrients from root to the stem and from stem to the leaves. And so if the water and nutrients don't go up the stem, then the plant's not going to do too well, and eventually it will even die. As an example, the fusarium here, where under moneymaker on the left-hand side, you have 3 parts. One on to the extreme left has just water in it, and the middle and the right one has a fungus called Fusarium oxysporum. You see, Fusarium has killed these. And now you on the right-hand side, right panel, this called Motel. The Motel variety apparently has resistance to Fusarium oxysporum because you see the plants in all 3 parts are much healthier. They're not dying. Of course, the one that received only water is taller than the other 2, which have Fusarium oxysporum in them. But nevertheless, those plants are alive. They will still produce some tomatoes. So that's the resistant variety. And then next fungus is known as Rhizoctonia. This fungus typically attacks the stem at the soil line here, and it'll make brown lesions. Sometimes they will get beyond this soil line and they expand, and it will often cause the wilting of the plant. And the 2 on the left, their roots are brown, but they're healthy roots, so they don't have the disease. The others have varying amount of disease. And then this fungus and the next one, this one here, these 2 are known as water molds because they usually attack the plant or young seedling, or sometimes even seed, because the soil is saturated with water, and that's what this fungus likes. And the next one, Phytophthora also. Sometimes the seedlings seed will not even germinate. If it germinates, then it will have this kind of stem, and eventually this is not going to make it. You see some examples at the bottom here, and in this case here, you see some damage to the stem here, and the roots are pruned also pretty much. These plants are not going to have very good roots. That happens to be a soybean plant here. Then this next one, same way, is also a water mold. It makes large irregular spots on the leaves, and also down lesions, brown lesions on the stem, and it causes wilting of the plants. It affects sometimes the fruit also. You can see this bell pepper fruit is basically had become soft and it's collapsed. And then at the bottom, you see a winter squash. Anything that comes close to the soil, any fruit, oftentimes will get the fungus, and it will finally decay. And this fungus is basically it's an omnivore. This is usually not a pathogen. It's a saprophyte, lives in the soil. You'll find it even in dirt sometime. And it will attack any kind of soft fruits. For example, blueberries, strawberries, and any kind of fruit that if it's sitting around for a while, will be infested by this fungus there. Also grapes. If you keep things in the after buying them, and even in refrigerator, it'll grow there. And so it will attack fruit. It'll attack stem here. Usually, it produces gray-colored growth. That's why it's known as gray mold. Also, this is a flower here, and this squash there, and it's a bean plant. So it causes damping off also if it attacks young seedlings. Then the next couple of fungi that we'll be talking about are known as, this one is Sclerotinia. They both produce sclerotia. Sclerotia are these dark, hard bodies that this fungus produces. There's dark things here inside the stem. It started out with the whitish growth that eventually these growth turned into knots, and they are known as sclerotia, and they grow inside, and they can live in the soil for a long, long time. And now, these days, people are being encouraged not to turn their soil because it disturbs the soil and messes up soil structure, which is a good thing. But one penalty of doing that is that if you plant there, you will see this kind of situation. You'll see a lot of dead plants, unless you use some kind of fungicide or do something else. And Sclerotium ralphii, they also produce sclerotia. Unlike the previous one, which produced irregular black sclerotia, these start out as whitish, light brown sclerotia to dark brown sclerotia. They look, if you saw them, if you mix them with mustard seed, you could easily confuse them with mustard seeds. They're same size and look the same, color also. So it starts out with white cottony growth around the bottom part of the stem closer to soil line, and then with time they turn into the sclerotia, and they also will attack fruit. In this case, it's a tomato. You can see there's a bunch of sclerotia and white mycelium there. Verticillium wilt is also a pretty serious disease. There's really not too many good fungicides for it, but perhaps there are some now. When about 20 some years ago there wasn't anything, and then it causes discoloration. Not discoloration. I'm sorry. It causes leaves to drop off from top, and the plant may wilt and die, and fruits remain small, and they get sunburned because the plant doesn't have many leaves there. So if you have really hot summertime, you will get sunburn on the fruit also. Tomatoes sometimes get sunburned because the plant doesn't have too many leaves on it. And again, this is also grows inside the stem, like other 2 or 3 I was showing you earlier. They are basically affecting the plumbing of the plant, because there are 2 types of vessels inside the plant, xylem and phloem. Xylem takes the water and nutrients up to the plant to the top, and phloem brings the finished product, which is sugar, down to nourish the plant. So if those things get choked up, then the plant's going to die. And then the last one here that I was going to show is called Root of Crucifers. You can see on any kind of cruciferous plants, which radishes and cauliflower, cabbage, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, those things. They make these knots, club roots, because they make these knots here on the root. You can see down here. And what it does, it basically destroys the crop. Nobody's going to buy this kind of crop, this swelling. So also in extreme cases, you will see wilting and death of plant. Then there are this one and the next one, they're caused by bacteria. Ralstonia solanacearum as a bacterium, you could see it causes wilting of plant, the healthy one on the right-hand side. A good way to identify these bacteria is to take a piece of stem, cut it, and put it in a container of water. This happens to be a cylinder, and you see this white ooze coming out of the cut stem. That's an indication that it's infected by a bacterium. Then Erwinia is another bacterial wilt, and it also affects carrots, also known as Erwinia carotivora. It causes wilting and drying of leaves. In this case, it's a pumpkin plant. You can see it's all wilted because of Erwinia. What really happens is that in the beginning, it doesn't really cause wilting. What it does, it doesn't cause permanent wilting. It causes temporary during the day because that's when the sun is hot and plants dry out much more easily. But they may recover in the at nighttime. But if this happens too many times, eventually the plant would die. Now, the last one here, I think among the thing, it's a Streptomyces. It's a kind of bacterium that makes chains. And this does not affect the yield, but it affects the quality of the produce. You might have seen potatoes in the grocery store sometime have these kinds of spots. And there are three types. They can be superficial like this, slightly raised, or sunken, like you see these deep spots here, there. And the soils that are sandy, it happens there a lot. Apparently there's actinomycete, or the bacterium, likes that kind of soil. And it's also seed-borne. Now, talking about nematodes, nematodes do a lot of damage to crops too. There are two nematodes known as cyst nematodes because they produce cysts, are Globodera and Heterodera. This is Globodera. It affects potato, known as potato cyst nematode. These things here on the root, they are cysts. They are basically females encysted, and then they had eggs inside like this one, and those eggs hatch, and then the larvae go inside and feed on the root system, and then this is what happens. You have a lot of skips there and a yellowing there. And the next one is known as root knot nematode because it makes these knots in the root. You can see carrots here that don't look very good to eat. And you also can see the knots on the left here on the root. The right one is healthy root. This is a nematode here, basically a picture of the nematode. So this is known as Meloidogyne incognita because it's kind of hide, so you can't see it, causes poor growth of plants, and it's got a wide host range, and there are some varieties that are resistant to it. People try to plant those. So it's a lot of damage to the crop. And then stem and bulb nematode, that basically attacks onion and garlic. And you can see this garlic here. You don't have much of a garlic here to harvest from here. They get turned black, and the bulbs are pretty much gone. And the infected crop is basically no good to harvest. And this is known as dagger nematode or Ziphinema americanum. Actually attacks the roots of grapes. It's a pretty serious thing. And this is the fungus feeding on the root system, and this is what happens to roots, you know, the swollen root, pan-shaped. And this is also a nematode that transmits viruses. And then this is a yellow virus that's transmitted to this grape plant by this nematode. So they are bad by themselves, but they are also a vector or carrier of these other diseases caused by viruses. And I sent Warren this and the next slide, so I'm not going to talk much about them. And these are different things you can do in order to manage soil-borne pathogens. But I would show you these four pictures. There are certain things you can buy there if you don't want to use chemicals. This is Streptomyces called Mycostop. It's controls. I would not use the word controls. I would say suppress. Pythium, Phytophthora, and Rhizoctonia and Fusarium. This is available commercially. Pre-stop is another fungus that, this one is a streptomycete. This is a fungus, Glycladium catenulatum. This also controls a bunch of diseases, including botrytis and plasmodiaphora. And actinovate is, contains streptomyces there, Perpethium, Phytophthora, and Verticillium, those things. And root shield. This is trichoderma. Trichoderma is a fungus that grows usually you would see in top of soil when there's a lot of moisture and other things. If you had used some kind of chemical in the fumigant, soil fumigant in soil, first thing to grow back out is Trichoderma harzianum. It's very competitive fungus, and unlike others, which basically control disease by competing with pathogens, this one actually attacks the fungus. Fungus is attacking another fungus and growing inside of it and killing it. That's how trichoderma works. Then there is microtrol. This is the fungus to control whiteflies, aphids, thrips, and other insects. You know, that's to control insects. This one is made by Safer, but original one was made by Abbott Labs, Bacillus thuringiensis. This is a bacterium that produces toxic crystals that grow inside of the caterpillars to control caterpillars. It's excellent product. This one is made by Safer and is commercially available. And then the next one is neem oil. Neem oil has been used to control insects and nematodes. Here's one. And it got certain chemicals in it that work pretty well and is safe. And then lady beetles, you can see this one feeding on a aphid. And you can buy these also commercially. They're commercially available. So that's the end of what I had to say. And I'll try to answer some of your questions.
Okay, I have two questions. One from Tom Mills. He suspects he has an area called armillaria. A-R-M-I-L-L-A-R-I-A.
Armillaria, right?
Are there controls available?
Armillaria is not easy to control, but I can from last time I knew it wasn't, but you know, things are happening. So I'll write it down and. Okay. There was one other question earlier.
Yeah, I have a second question. It's about a blight from James Wade. Phytophthora. Late blight in tomatoes are big problems this time of the year.
Right.
Any suggestions? And I think you covered that with the chemicals.
Yeah, Phytophthora is the fungus that caused migration of Irish people to this country. Irish famine, and English did not help a whole lot. They would not give any kind of help assistance to the Irish, and thousands and thousands of them died, and that's what caused the Irish famine and migration of Irish people to the United States. And yeah, you're correct. There are, its disease is so severe and does so much damage that in each state where potatoes and tomatoes are grown, a cooperative extension service from the land grant university. In case of North Carolina, it's North Carolina State University in Raleigh. They have programs and they have forecasts depending on the kind of weather. Whenever it's rainy weather, that's when the fungus goes wild. And they have forecasting service to tell growers when to start using fungicides, you know. And there are lots of fungicides, good fungicides available for controlling Phytophthora. Unfortunately, for those who are looking for some kind of biological solution for it, I'm not aware of one that really works. So for Phytophthora, if you want some fungicides, I could suggest some.
Now, there was a question earlier from Rush. Could you please share a link to the video discussing the tree fungus axis?
Oh, Mycorrhizae? Yeah, I can do that.
if you get a link for that. And if you forward them to me, I'll forward it to the group.
Okay.
Along with the, now I told the group that we're going to make this on YouTube by invitation. It's not searchable, but I will send a link out to everybody. I'll hope to have it out on YouTube this afternoon.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I can send you the link.
All right.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm running out of time because at 2 o'clock, I had to have another Zoom audio conference.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
but I enjoyed talking to you, all of you, and hopefully you found one or two useful things in the presentation that you can take home. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
you very much. Appreciate it.
All right then.
Hopefully we'll talk again. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you. Great job.
Sure, thanks.